Okay, let's get started. Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Paula Houghton. I'm the Director of Outreach and Engagement at Foundations, Inc. Foundations is a national education nonprofit located in Mount Laurel, New Jersey. Our mission is to improve the quality of education by strengthening the skills of educators. So we work with adults who work with kids everywhere that learning happens, whether that's school day or after school, summertime, or even with families. If you haven't yet, please take a moment to follow us on social media, and I'm going to drop that information in the chat. You may already know us from the Beyond School Hours Conference, which happens every year in February. It's our signature professional development event. This year we'll be in Orlando, Florida from February 9th to 12th. It's a great time, lots of really inspiring new best practices and techniques and strategies, and also just a lot of fun. I'll drop a link with more information to that in the chat, and we hope to see you all there. Today, our webinar is sponsored by the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation. I'd like to thank you all for being here today for another one of these Beyond School Hours webinars. We're so lucky today to be joined by one of our amazing Foundation's education specialists. Hillary Jones is here to talk about restorative practices, and she'll be sharing 4 techniques for improving and repairing relationships. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Hillary.
Thanks, Paula, for having me. I'm happy to be here and talk to you guys all a little bit about how we approach restorative practices and managing behaviors. We're going to do just a very quick introduction overview. We only have an hour. This is something that you could spend a lot of hours on and really spend time at looking at and understanding how restorative practices are used to merge strong relationships between individuals with community connections. And during this session, we're going to talk about how you can use these very practically in your out-of-school time program or in your classroom. And so these are practices that can be used with adults, with students, but in all of our examples today, we're going to talk about what they look like using them with students. And so as we get started, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. My name's Hillary. I, as Paula said, am an educational specialist at Foundations, Inc., and I'm relatively new to the team. I've been doing this about 10 months. Before that, I ran out-of-school time programs for the last 8 years, and then before that was a school day teacher teaching high school Spanish and English. As we go through our time together today, just real quick, I know you're all Zoom experts, but we are going to use our annotation tools, which you will see up above the green bar that says you are viewing Hillary Jones's screen. So please use that as we go through our session today. We will also use some reactions as we engage. But I want to get started by hearing a little bit from you. So we're going to use our chat box a lot today. You guys introduced yourself, but I want you to imagine you are in conflict with a person who's important in your life. That could be a family member, that could be a friend, that could be a boss, somebody who matters to you. What values do you want to guide your conduct as you try to work out that conflict? What are some things that you say, this is how I'm going to approach this? And this could just be 1 or 2 words. Share those with us in the chat. What are those values that work for you? For me, some of them are harmony and peace, integrity, and I want to rehabilitate that relationship. That would be something that's important to me as I engage with people who aren't important in my life and as I deal with conflict with them, because we do have conflict no matter what. I'm seeing some honesty, grace, peace, open listening. I like that one. Honest and kind, honesty, empathy, love. Empathy shows up again, grace again, patience, respect, compassion, empathy, right? Mutual understanding, respect, transparency. I like that one. I didn't see that one. Haven't seen that one before. Understanding, non-judgmental. I missed a few in there, but compassion and understanding, respect, right? It's about how we want to treat and how we want to engage with each other. And as you're thinking about your response, about how you want to be a person who manages conflict, these responses are centered on the relationship and they're centered on supporting it and maintaining it, right? When we say respect, when we say understanding, when we say empathy, right? It's about not just ourselves, and how we feel, but about how we engage with others. And perhaps that's why you're here today as we start to talk about restorative practices. Restorative practices is really about creating this culture, this climate to improve relationships within a community. So, we're going to look at this. This is the idea that restorative practices understand that human beings are happier, they're more cooperative, they're more productive, they're more likely to make positive changes in behavior when those who are leaders, who are in those positions of authority, do things with them rather than to them or for them. And so that would be the first thing I say. If you're going to take something away from today, take away that our students are more likely to make positive changes in themselves, in their behavior, when we do things with them rather than to them or for them. One of my colleagues likes to say, can you be the guide on the side instead of the sage on the stage, a lot. And it's a very similar idea. As we work with the young people in our world, can we come alongside and do things with them? Instead of being authoritarian or permissive in our practices. And those are the less effective approaches in comparison with restorative practices. So this picture is what is called the social discipline window. It was originally modeled by the work of Daniel Glasse at the University of Illinois. And it really looks at the dynamics of low versus high support and control. And it comes back to that doing things with people instead of doing things to them, that is punishment, it's punitive, or for them, it's letting them have what they want, right? It's that permissive management, or as a way of dealing with our students and how they engage. So restorative practices occur when students receive high levels of support, such as encouragement, and when we're nurturing them, as well as high levels of control in giving limits that create a space where we're creating a space for students that it's not open, where anything can happen, right? And so we want to balance those things, not being punitive with our control because there's no support, but bringing those things together so that students are receiving both of them in order to promote creating a space where they can learn and where they can grow, because these restorative practices really impact the environment. Yes, we absolutely are going to record this session. The session is being recorded, and you will be able to listen to it another time if you can't stay here today. So for our session today, we're going to look at four restorative practices, that we would recommend that if you're unfamiliar with these, that we would say start at one. Start with these affective statements, then move your way through this process. If you say, I'm already doing some of these, you can jump into more. But one of the things that I will say to you is this is something that as adults, as leaders, it takes time to build this in ourselves. We have to practice these skills as much as our students will. So the first one that we're going to look at, the first restorative practice, is these affective statements. And we communicate a lot of things to students, a lot of things about how you're impacting others. So I'd love to hear from you in the chat box. What's something that you say to students regularly, like that they hear from you all the time? Is it clean up your space, or stop bothering them? Or what is the thing that comes out of your mouth all the time? I know for me, when I was running programs, I was always walk through spaces and say to students, keep your hands, feet, and objects to yourself. Like that came out of my mouth so many times. And those aren't bad things, but do you have those things that you're saying? Well, don't do that. I like that. Those are the same kinds of things. Get it together. Yes. Be extraordinary. Walking feet came out of my mouth so many times too. Please pay attention, right? All of those things are statements that we make, but we want to shift those statements of telling students what to do into these affective statements, ones that acknowledge your feelings and students' feelings. And some of you are heading towards those with some of the questions you're asking yourselves. And so statements like, I'm happy to see you keeping your hands to yourself. Or I'm thankful that you're being a good listener. Instead of saying, don't bother them, can you say, I feel like you may be bothering this other student. Have you asked them about this? Or instead of saying, you have to clean up, you can say, I'm thankful when you clean up, it keeps our environment healthy and safe, right? Those kinds of things are things that would be more effective statements for us to use. So how can you switch either the statement you just shared or another statement that you hear come out of your mouth more quickly to an affective statement, a statement about your observation or your feelings or the impact on the group, instead of saying to statements, hey, don't do this, don't do that, stop this, stop that. Thank you for following direction. Have you ever walked around a room and started calling kids by name and saying, John, thank you for doing what you're doing. Susie, stop. Thank you for doing what you're doing. Lynn, stop. Thank you for doing what you're doing. Berta, thank you for doing what you're doing. Saul, thank you for doing what you're doing. Right. And then notice the ones who aren't doing what you want them to be doing, start paying attention and be like, oh, I got to get my name called. Right. Those kinds of things are the effects of effective statements. I like the answer of, I appreciate you respecting them, right? Respecting their space, maybe if they're not managing their own physical space, or can anybody share what's going on? Shannon gives an example. Let's look at a couple more examples. So if I have the statement, if I, instead of saying be quiet to a student, what could I say? It's an affective statement that says, I'm feeling how I'm feeling, what I'm experiencing because of what you're doing in the classroom. Anybody got some ideas? Can you change be quiet to a statement that expresses what you're experiencing and how it's impacting you? I'll get you started and then you can add. I'm feeling irritated that you were talking while I was teaching or giving directions or whatever it is that you're doing. Maybe you even say, I worked hard on this and really think that you're going to like this activity we're going to do. Can you raise your hand when you want to talk? So if Amber says, I'm having a hard time being heard by everyone, Amber, and then add how that makes you feel. I feel frustrated because, or I feel discouraged because we have something really exciting to do today. This or that. Lynn says, I feel frustrated that others can't hear me, right? Can you tell me about it a little later? That's a different kind of question, not necessarily an affective statement, Angela, but you're on the right track. Like that may be a way to maintain your relationship instead of just saying, time out, be quiet, right? And so you have to keep those things in mind too. But it's important for us to explain our feelings to students, to express how what they're doing is impacting, because we in turn, as we continue through the tools that you can use that are restorative practices, we're going to expect students to do that. And so if we're not modeling it for them, it creates a challenge. Amy just said, I am sad because I cannot hear my friends' answers. That's a great way to express that, especially with little ones. I can just hear that voice coming out with little ones. Let's try this one. You just hurt Sam. What would you say? What would your affective statement about how you experience that other one student hurting Sam? I'll give you an example why you think. It made me uneasy to see you put your hands on Sam. Respect is an important thing to me and to our community, right? You're bringing in the group and the impact that it's having. Can you tell me what's happening with the two of you? And some of you asked some good questions earlier. That's one of those questions that you might pull into your affective statement instead of saying, you did that, like stop doing that. Right? Anybody got other ideas? Oh, I like that, Lucy. I can see that Sam is feeling hurt. Can you tell me what's going on? I feel worried about the safety of Sam and others in the class because of your actions. Absolutely on track. Yeah, what you're feeling, what you're concerned about. And it gives the students space to respond, space to engage. I got one more. This one's don't touch her, right? Don't touch her. How many times do we say, don't touch them? I said to you guys as we started, I said, one of the things I would say to students all the time, Keep your hands, feet, and objects to yourself. I would just walk through spaces. I'd be walking down the hallway and there's a line going the other way and I see something and that would come out of my mouth. But really, if I'm going to take the time and really address it and make a difference in the relationships with my students, teach them how to express what they're feeling, what they're experiencing, I might say something like, I feel uncomfortable when I see you touching another student. I value everybody feeling safe, secure. Would you be willing to talk about what's going on between the two of you or why you touched them, right? Those kinds of things can be a way to say, express how you feel, how it makes you feel, so that students can follow that model, and then expressing what you want to talk about with them instead of saying no, addressing it in a positive way. Okay, so once you've done these affective statements in your classroom, you've modeled that for your students. Another way to engage in restorative practices, a simple technique, is the small impromptu conversation. And these are held before an issue occurs or immediately after. They're short, like less than 5 minutes, and they may use some restorative questions I'm going to teach in a moment. But I will tell you this, 80% of these conversations should be proactive and 20% should be reactive. That means that you should be having conversations regularly before you have a disciplinary action that can be used to reflect on what's happening in the classroom, even good things, right? And so that can mean things like, hey, class, group of students, what are we getting ready to do next? And how are we going to do that? Or, hey, what were some good things that happened in our day today? These are just quick moments that you take time to say, hey, we're going to talk about what's happening in our environment, how we're feeling, how we're experiencing our space, and how we're going to move forward in our space. They don't have to be all in response to negative behaviors. In fact, they're not supposed to, right? 80% are proactive. They're before something happens. But I said that you may use restorative questions in them. And so let's look at these restorative questions. They are 5 really quick questions that you can use as a part of restorative practices to ask students when a challenging situation arrives. And these questions I'm dropping for you in the chat box, a handout with these questions on them. So don't worry, you don't have to write them down. But as you think about engaging with students, they're having some kind of conflict, you're going to use these questions. So let's look at them and then talk through a scenario. So the question might be something like, the scenario might be something like, there's 2 boys, they go running up to the door without cleaning up to line up, right? Maybe you've told everybody to clean up. You said we're going to clean up and then line up. They go running, boom, they're headed to the door. They didn't clean up anything. They crash into one another and somebody gets mad, right? Those things happen in our programs, in our classrooms, in our spaces sometimes. And so somebody's mad, not a major issue, but you can pause, you can take 5 minutes right here, because hopefully the rest of your students are cleaning up, and say to them, hey, what happened? What were you thinking about at that time? Like, what were you thinking about when you went running to the door instead of taking the time to clean up your space first? What have you thought about since? How mad you are that they got to the door first, maybe, or something else about why they're upset, why they're angry, why they're frustrated. And then who's been affected by what you've done and in what way? So both students were impacted, right? They both crashed. They're both standing right now talking to you. But other students who are cleaning up are also affected, because when everybody doesn't clean up, we take away from the workload, gets heavier for those who are cleaning. And you're even impacting the adult who's taking time to address the issue, right? And so what do you think that you need to do to make things right? Well, we're going to apologize to one another and we're going to take the time to clean up, right? Easy questions, quick questions that you can kind of just have in your back pocket as you talk to students, as you help them think about it. And you notice some of those questions are some of the questions you all were already asking in the chat box that I said, oh, we're going to come to those questions. You might not have used those exact same words, but you were asking those questions. So we're going to look at an example of someone using the restorative questions. And as we do that, I want you to pay attention to how the questions are used and how this conversation is different than a conversation that you might be having with your students. We're going to share the restorative questions from the last slide. I just dropped them in the chat box so that you can follow along. But as you watch this video, I want you to pay attention to those questions, how they're being used, and how this would be different from what you currently do.
Okay, thank you for taking the time to talk with me today. This conversation will take about 5 to 10 minutes.
Whatever.
Do you not want to talk? Because you're not in trouble, first of all. And if you want to come back and have this conversation tomorrow when you're in a different headspace, we can do that then. What do you think?
I guess.
You sure? Because I just want you to be comfortable. Okay. So, you know, Jimmy, you're a really good student. You're a great reader. You're always volunteering to help in the class, and I just appreciate and I enjoy having you as a student. So what's working for you in my class?
I like how we read a lot of books and that they're interesting, but they're not like long.
Interesting how?
I don't know. Reading's always been interesting for me.
Kind of let your imagination wander? I like to read a lot too. Helps me escape. What's not working for you? Because today was a very off day, so I kind of want to know so I can help better support you.
Well, me and some friends a friend got in an argument. Last weekend, we made plans to go watch a movie, and me and my friend Christina told our other friend Brianna that we weren't gonna go whenever we actually did, and she went with her family and she saw us there, and I don't think she was expecting us to be there because we told her we weren't.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is that you all had made plans and then you lied to her and then you went anyway. And so how are you feeling about that?
It's just weird talking to her.
Well, let me ask you this. How is it impacting you all as a group and your learning?
Like, we told her something, like we lied to her, so it's weird to talk to her if she knows about it.
Yeah, it's kind of hard. How do you think we could fix that? Or can we fix that? Would you be willing to talk to her? Would you like it if I helped facilitate the conversation? Yeah, I think that we can all sit down and we can talk about it.
Okay, so what did you observe about how the adult in this conversation used the restorative questions? Did you notice anything? And then the second question I'm going to ask you so you can start thinking, start typing, is what difference would this type of conversation make for students or staff? What impact would this have? No judgment on the part of the adult. And she created space to ask if she was comfortable having the conversation. Was she ready to have the conversation? It was a conversation. It wasn't a disciplinary moment, right? It was about addressing something, creating space for it. And for every student, you may not just be able to say, we want to talk about this tomorrow, but you may be able to say, hey, I'll give you a couple minutes to get ready to talk about this, or I'll come back in a while and be able to have space for that. Yeah. I also, repeating back what she heard, what was said. There was praise associated with it, creating space to say, this is positive. I'm trying to build my relationship. I'm trying to hear what they are saying and create space instead of jumping in. Allowing students to have time to process, because We know that all of our students can't process as quickly as we can get going. Use their words in repeating it back. Those are all great examples. And so what impact would a conversation like this make for students or staff that you're working with? What impact does something like this have? Because this is not a school problem. This is not a after school program problem, right? This is something that happened at home. So what impact does this have on each of you, on what's happening? Why does it make a difference for this student? Amber says it builds trust. Absolutely. And even additionally, it builds that relationship between the adult and the child because they recognize that the adult's paying attention. They're seeing what's happening, right? It creates a safe space, Maria says, and it does. It creates that space for the relationships. It's a proactive conversation, right? There's not necessarily been a problem in the program. This is something that happened at home, but it creates a space for that. And it moves to developing those troubleshooting, problem solving, and life skills things. And that's an important part of restorative practices is it is something that you build in your students over time that then they can in turn use in other situations and scenarios as they continue through. I think the other thing that stands out to me about this conversation is that this conversation, although it's held with one student, it's going to make an impact on multiple students. It's something that doesn't just touch one of them and can help restore your environment in your program, in your classroom, and in your space. And so it's an important part of that. Nisha says she noticed, absolutely. She noticed that something was wrong, taking the time to see that. All of those are important parts of how we design and how we build our programs. So let's do a little bit of what I'll call a guided practice, for lack of a better term. So you're going to need to get your annotation tool ready. So look for it where it says you're reviewing Hillary Jones's screen. Up there, you should see an annotate little pencil, or if not, check under more. Grab that, get something ready, because we are going to work our way through a scenario with this character, Sam. So Sam is being disruptive while everybody else in the group is working on a bridge building. So I want you to use your annotation tool, and I want you to choose whether you think you should use an affective statement to address this or a small impromptu conversation to address this. What would you choose first? I got somebody who says affective state. I've got a few affective statements. Somebody's ready for the small impromptu conversation. Getting a few more saying, yes, affective statements, they're the right thing for me. Absolutely. And I think when it's possible, starting with that affective statement, I said early on, you're going to want to start there if you can, is appropriate. Now, we don't have all the context. I don't know what you've already said or what your engagement or relationship is with Sam, right? But when you can, you want to start with the affective statement. So that being said, we're going to start with the affective statement, and I want you to think about what would you say to Sam? Okay, so in the chat box, write what affective statement you would say to Sam. Remember, everybody's working on in groups on this bridge building activity, and Sam is not. Sam is being disruptive. What would you say? I might say to Sam something like, Sam, I'm frustrated with how many times I've repeated to you the directions for this activity and reminded you of the class rules. And it's making me feel like I need to do something additionally, make a stronger action. I see in the chat, Sam, I see that you're struggling to stay on task. Is there anything I can do to help you get back on task? Absolutely, Maria. That's a great question. Asking students how you can help them get back on task. I see one that started on the screen that started with, Sam, I think your friends really need your, I don't know where that was going to, But maybe it ends with your cooperation and how can I help you? I think that's a great way. Sam, I'm disappointed that you're the only one not on pass. And what do I need to do to get you back on that? What about this assignment isn't good for you? I love that you made it about the assignment and not all about the student, right? Can we work together to understand? It's perfect. So you guys have some great answers here. You're thinking. And so now that you know, okay, here's my affective statement, sometimes that'll work for you. And sometimes it doesn't work for you. Sometimes we are ready for a higher level of intervention. And so in this case, if we, excuse me, if we're ready for that higher level of intervention, we can use those small impromptu conversations to talk about it. So with your annotation tool, you can use a stamp, you can draw a line, whatever it is. Look at the 5 questions. I have them here on the screen for you. Look at those questions and tag the ones that you say, I would ask these questions. Because if you noticed in our video, she didn't ask every single one of the questions. She kind of asked the ones that seem to apply, that seem to fit in the situation or in the scenario. So tag the questions that you say, these are the ones I would be asking if I'm talking to Sam, if I'm trying to address the behaviors that I'm seeing. And we say, what do you need to do to make things right? As a common response. What happened? Absolutely. You might not say what happened because this is something that's ongoing, but you might say something like what's going on, right? Rewording it, because we also saw in our video example that you don't have to use the exact words of the questions. Again, just kind of getting those questions in front of you as part of that. Checking in on who's been effective. You guys are marking that one quite frequently. And then the biggest one is, what do you think you need to do to make things right? That's your top question, I think, if I was counting each of these little marks as votes. And thinking about and getting Sam thinking about what needs to happen to make those go well and go smoothly through the process. And you're right. All of these are good questions. And the only one that you might not use is what have you thought about since? Because guess what? We're right in the moment. We've caught it right then and there. It's not an incident that happened that we're responding to. But since it's happening right now, obviously it makes sense that you may not need that one. And so as you think about that, I want you to think about the what happened question. Okay. I want you to think about Sam and think about asking him what happened, what he would be doing. And I want you to think about what you might say to start your conversation with Sam, because you're seeing those behaviors, you're recognizing that, hey, I already gave you those affective statements that tried to redirect your behavior. Now I have to pull you aside. I have to have that conversation. How are you going to get this conversation going? And so if you say, what happened to Sam, if you ask him, what are you thinking about, or any of those questions, you might discover that for Sam, he's struggling. He's got a challenge in front of him. And maybe he doesn't understand. Maybe he's bored. Maybe he doesn't like the activity or his group, right? There's all kinds of reasons that there could be a problem for Sam. The next one is, what are you thinking of at the time? And although we said we probably wouldn't ask Sam that question because of how it's formed, you might ask Sam, why are you having a hard time engaging? What are you thinking about? And he may say something like, this activity is boring. I don't want to work with the student who I assigned with. He's the know-it-all. How would you respond to Sam if he says, I don't want to work with that student? He's a know-it-all. What do you think you would say? So drop it in the chat or write it on the screen. What would you say to Sam? He says, I don't want to do it. You started the conversation. How can you create relationship with Sam? How can you help support Sam in that? How can you engage him? Do you just let him out of the project? Does he not have to do it anymore? Or maybe do you try and give him another chance in that space? Barbara says, are you sure? Have you worked with him before? Or why would you say that, right? It creates space. And I love Lynn pulled back in her affective statement. She says, that makes me sad to hear you don't want to work with him, right? Pulling that in. And so, yeah, recognizing Lucy says that each person in our class is an important part, including you, right? Recognizing the things that Sam does really well that you can link in. And recognizing, is that something that students told them or that they're feeling, right? And helping them acknowledge their emotions is a huge part of it. And so all of that is an important part of those skills, helping them responding with that. You guys also tagged that question. Oh, you're still going, you're flying. So explain that everyone has a workload and everybody needs to get a fair chance. Offering what would you like to do, encourage Sam that they're needed in this process, right? Just creating that space that everybody's valuable, all those things. Okay, I'm gonna keep moving. You guys are great. So who has been affected by what you've done and in what way? That's a great question. And so if you ask that question to Sam, Sam might say, well, I'm affected, right? Sam might even recognize that you're affected or that the other student's affected, right? And that could be one student, it could be all the students, because Sam's disrupting, he's taking that space up so that you can't continue to support others, etc. And so we want to think about that and help Sam think about who Sam is impacting by making the decisions that they're making. And so the final thing to consider is, what do you think you need to do to make things right? That's that final question. And so for Sam, that's creating some options for Sam, saying, hey, we are ready. We need your support. We need your engagement to help this move forward. So we're going to try this using the restorative questions. And I actually need 2 volunteers who are feeling really brave for this activity. So one of the volunteers is going to pretend to be Alex, a middle school student, and one is going to pretend to be the leader and use the restorative questions. So you guys, you're going to get this on your own. You're going to try it. And then we're going to help you out if you get stuck. So you don't have to worry about being perfect. And I'll drop the restorative questions right in the box for you one more time so that you can see it. But I am looking for 2 people who are willing to come off mute, willing to be our volunteers. Whoever's first, my first volunteer can pretend to be Alex, or you can even choose, and the other can pretend to be the adult leader. Do I have any volunteers for us? All you're going to do is, if you're the adult leader, you're going to pretend to have the conversation. Nobody's feeling that brave. Oh boy.
I'll do it.
Okay, you'll do it. You're in. Let's see.
Me too.
Okay, that sounds like 2 volunteers. Who, so who wants to be what?
Open.
I can be Alex.
Okay, you're up. You're Alex, and then you're going to be our adult leader, right? So the students were working on this project. You look at the postings they did, and you discover that there's some inappropriate language, sexual references. You're going to use these restorative questions and put them in the chat one more time for you, so they're right in front of you. And what's your conversation with Alex going to be like? You guys can just go for it when you're ready, feeling brave, and have the conversation.
I guess I'll start it. What happened?
I don't know. I thought I was just messing around.
Oh, okay. I had to go back to the screen. I'm sorry. I'm on my phone.
That's okay.
I don't have to use those restorative questions, right?
No, you can use other ones.
Oh.
You don't have to have the exact wording isn't there. I'm just giving you some to get in front of you so that if you're stuck, you've got them.
So you thought you were just messing around, huh?
Yeah, I didn't know you were gonna see him. I wanted to just be silly with my friends.
Oh, so what exactly? So what I'm hearing you say is you and your friends were just playing around.
That's it. That's it. It's not a big deal.
Oh, what do you think somebody would think if they saw it or if they read it? Who was it for? Who did you leave that joke in there to read?
Um, I mean, I guess some people might know I was joking, but maybe some others might think I was kind of out of pocket.
So the joke was for you and your friends, right?
It was
And you put that joke in a space for everybody to see?
probably not the best idea.
Yeah. So I know that there's some language used that we don't use here. But first I want to address, I want you to know that I understand you and your friends were just joking, but you put that in a space where everyone can see it. Do you see how that could kind of go bad?
Yeah, I mean, I really didn't think you guys were paying attention to the post like that though. Like I thought it was just me and my friends, but you're right. Probably wasn't the best place to put it.
Yeah, and the language part. So again, the space where we use that. So it's not really what we use here. So I don't want to say that people that use that language is bad, but for this space, it's not the best. So we don't talk to each other like that here. You understand where I'm coming from? You understand why I'm asking you not to do that again?
Yes, ma'am. I see why.
Okay. Do you want us to keep going? I would probably be done. Well, my
Okay.
objective is to correct
So,
it.
no, you're fine. You can be done. You can be done. So, what did you guys see or hear? What went really well for the leader in the conversation? And then is there anything that you say, ooh, I might have done this a little differently? Because we're learning together. We're trying to improve our skills. We got some brave people who were our volunteers to try it. What would we say went well? What do we say that they could do better? I'm going to say, I loved how you said, I don't really like the way you said something along the lines of, I don't really like the way that felt, right? You expressed how it felt for you. You used really good affective statements and you pulled them aside. You had this conversation, right? I kind of set the scenario up for you, but that went well. Is there anything else that you're like, hey, they did great at, you heard something that you really liked, anything else that you're like, I would have tried something different?
I like how she kind of kept her personal her tone. Like, this is how she generally talks with the kids, and it felt like it didn't feel like a formal moment that could be uncomfortable. It was like a very casual conversation, but still like expecting them to be reflective. I think the tone of it was nice.
Very nice. Yep. I didn't put on my mean teacher voice. I'm yelling at you. We had to talk about this thing that happened. Absolutely. Anybody else?
I would just agree with the encouraging for reflection. There was a lot of, do you see why this might be an issue? Do you see why this might not be okay? Or, I felt like that was important as well.
Yep.
I think she also did a really good job of pointing out that the language itself can be problematic depending on the space that it's used in, but she didn't black and white say somebody who uses this language is bad.
Absolutely. Lynn just said in the chat box, she didn't judge the student based on the language that was used. And that's exactly it. It's not, this is bad language, this is good language, but instead, this isn't the right place and space for it. And yet there was good questions, good conversation around that. I think the only thing that I would change or shift in the conversation is, although there was a lot of questioning that happened, a lot of it was closed questions. So it was, do you see why you can't do that? Do you understand why that's not the right way? So the student says yes, yes, yes. But instead, we want to try and flip that with some questions that are a little more open-ended, that has them respond to, how does that impact your peers, right? Just open those questions up a little bit more, and you will have a even stronger impact to a good conversation, because that was a very good conversation. And so if you catch yourself as you're practicing these, as you're having these conversations with students, asking a lot of closed questions, just try and open them up a little bit. So we'll keep going. Sometimes though, our scenarios are a little bit more extreme. They're bigger, they have a bigger impact on others. And so these are some questions that we can use with students who have been harmed by others, who have been harmed by an individual who's acting negatively. And that does happen in our program sometimes. It happens in our classrooms sometimes. It happens in our spaces. And so we want to be intentional around that, helping those who have been harmed by others. And so these are 5 questions that you can use in that process. So what did you think when you realized what happened, right? That's a great question. Kids got in a fight, and all of a sudden there's all these other kids being pulled into that fight. We need to be attentive to that. And so creating that space and making that move forward in a way that's smooth and effective. Asking a question like, what impact has this incident had on you and had on others, is an important part of that process. Helping students recognize and use those affective statements about how it's impacting them, but also recognizing that they may be able to see how it's impacting others and helping them be reflective in that way. What's been hard for you, and then what do you need to think needs to happen to make things right? What do you need to do to make things go well better in the program, to make our relationships improve or heal, right? When there's a fight in your program, things happen. And again, these questions are in the handout, so you can grab them if you want them to use them with your students. But before we go further, I want you to think back to Alex, right? And I want you to think about the adult. And we just had a little role play about the language that was used. But imagine if you had to talk to the students, the whole class or the whole group that was on that board, everybody who responded. And so I want you to think about, how do you think the students in the group feel? How do you think that they are experiencing that language? Does having the conversation with Alex complete what needs to happen in the program or in the classroom or in the space? What do you think other students are experiencing? Does anybody think that maybe students are experiencing, they're frustrated, right? Is that something that's happening across the board more broadly, right? Maybe this isn't the only place where that kind of language is being used and they feel uncomfortable around it. Yeah, maybe they feel like they need to respond, whether it's laugh at something that they don't think is funny, or maybe it's use that same kind of language or talk about those same kinds of things in a context that is not really appropriate. And so creating that space and asking these kinds of questions can be helpful to our students when they're feeling uncomfortable, when they're feeling picked on. You know, if it's a response to a post in a chat, and it's not one of the students who's the friends, they could feel uncomfortable because maybe it really starts to feel like bullying or something else. Whatever it may be, it's important that we address everybody when we're using our restorative practice who's impacted by this. And so if you're thinking about having these conversations, you may need to have the first conversation that we role played with Alex occur, and then follow it up with a second conversation with the whole group about what happened, especially if you need to set the tone to say, hey, we're not going to do this here. We're not going to do this in our program. A formal conversation with all the perspectives involved is what we call a restorative circle. And these don't have to be only responsive to negative behavior like we're talking about with Alex, but again, 80% should be proactive. These can be check-in, check-outs, or about how students are feeling, how they experienced an activity maybe, whether they liked it, didn't like it, what they liked about it, etc. They can be proactive behavior discussions, such as anybody ever sat your students down before a field trip and had the talk about this is what we're going to do, this is what's going to happen, how we're going to engage, how we're going to behave. That's important as we do things with our students. And so we use restorative circles because it's a fundamental part of healthy social relationships. It helps us feel connected, respected. We use it to tell our own stories, to have others listen, and to create space for those feelings, where others feel heard in the space, where others feel like they have power, where we give power and share power. And by listening to others' stories, how they're feeling, how they're experiencing things, that's how we empower them. And we validate their intrinsic worth as a human being. And so there are 5 things that you can use in your restorative circle. You don't have to use them all every time, but again, there's some techniques that you can use really easy. First is restorative circles. Oftentimes we need to state our norms. We need to say, this is what we are going to do in this session. This is how we're going to engage in the conversation. This is the standard for engagement. The second is we're going to do a check-in. You can keep it really simple, short. You can ask kids, go around the circle, Easy Mac or Hot Pockets. Where are you on a scale from 1 to 10? How are you feeling today? Right. They don't have to be deep questions. It's just, how are my students today? How are they feeling? How are they engaged? We need to introduce the topic sometimes. Sometimes we need to use some question prompts like, how has this impacted you? What has been meaningful to you today? Or what challenges do you face? And then commitments are this accountability piece. It's what are you going to do different, right? If we've had an issue in our classroom or in our program and we're addressing it with a larger group of students, we need to talk about what each one of us is going to do differently, what we're going to put into action. And then the checkout is just that same kind of thing as the check-in. It's just at the end. Where are you from a scale of 1 to 10, especially if you did something to improve your mood or improve the environment, checking to see if that was it. And so all of that is a part of what you might include in your restorative circle. And so I have an example of a restorative circle for you. And so we're going to watch a quick video. This is high school students participating in a restorative circle. And as we watch, I want you to use your annotate tool. And at the bottom, I've included those 5 things I just ran through pretty quickly, as well as affective statements and restorative questions. And I want you to watch, and if you hear them using norms, checkout, topic, affective statements, check-ins, commitments, or restorative questions, just use your annotate tool to put a little mark there, check, star, whatever you feel like, so that we can see what you are seeing and when you're seeing those things in the conversation. So here we go.
We're here today because we all were in somewhat impacted a part of the incident that happened in the cafeteria yesterday. So I want us to give y'all a space for us to address that and speak up the harm that was done and like what do we need to kind of move forward, because it definitely had an impact on us as individuals, but us as a community. So let's address that. So right here I have a talking piece in which it allows everybody to just have a voice, right? And we kind of respect that within this space, that person that has the talking speed has the floor at that time, and ensure that everybody's being attentive and listening, respecting the circle. I'm going to pose a couple questions, and each of y'all could address this question. You don't have to. Sometimes it's just best to be an ear than a voice, so there's no pressure in doing just that. Okay, so the first question I pose to you all is just, can you describe the harm that was done, any harm that was done yesterday, or how it impacted you or our community in any way?
I'm frustrated because everyone feels that their issue is everyone else's issue. Like, I came to school to learn and get my education.
I was put in an uncomfortable position. They were my friends. If I jumped in, I'll get suspended, and I can't get another suspension.
When things like this happen, I just feel like there's no point in coming to school. It's a waste of time.
I feel mad and sad because the fight now ruined our whole school day, man. Like, now everyone's gonna talk about it in school.
I see a lot of drama outside of school, and I just wish school was just a safe place, and it doesn't feel like it.
Honestly, my reputation. I mean, I don't want somebody to sound like I'm weak or walk all over me, but I see what you guys are saying, I see how you feel, and I'm sorry that I made you guys feel this way.
I don't know what to say, really. I just know that it's not a good thing. I don't want either of you to get hurt, and I don't want either of you to miss school. And I like to graduate with you, but if you guys get in any fights, we won't have that moment together. It's such a small thing, but it can have a very much bigger impact on everyone. So.
Once you fight, it's just like a game of tic-tac-toe. If I curse at you, you're gonna curse back. If I hit you, you're gonna hit back. If I knock you down, you probably gonna grab a gun. In a fight, there's no winner. Either if I'm in jail or she's dead. This school needs more like a group or a prevention for violence.
Well, I see there's like an array of harm that we can describe in emotions from those that feeling that, you know, their education has been kind of stripped from them, their safety, right? And we talked about a reputation as well. I'm glad we were able to bring that to light. And let's talk about like, go forward. How do we go forward here and speak of like, what can we do to make things better? So my next question for you all is, what do we need in the school to make things right?
I just want to say that I forgive you, because I wouldn't want you to make me feel that way. I know it seemed as much weak, but I understand if you would walk away, I would respect you more.
I think it takes a strong person to walk away from a fight.
I think Rashad is right. We have to stop this before this gets any worse.
It sounds like we really care about each other in our community, and I heard people say, like, I want to graduate with you. And so in moving forward, thinking about that, like, how do we hold each other up? Rashad spoke about this programming. What does that look like? Who's going to lead that? And when I'm sitting in this room, I see all of these leaders around the circle who really care about their community and keeping it safe. Even someone who the other day might not have been seen as a leader, who today can be. So just moving forward, I want you guys to think about that.
Great. And you all are the experts, right? You see all of those norms, topics, the check-ins, the commitments, restorative questions, affective statements. There was even like a short version of a checkout by the adult, but really that would be more inclusive and include the students in that. And because it's an edited version of a restorative circle, I'm sure that's included in there, but it didn't go in depth in the conversation. But I just want to point out a few things. You notice the leaders, they were very quiet and the students did most of the talking. And students engaged, they looked at one another, they listened to one another, but they didn't talk over them. They used that talking stick tool to be part of the navigating that conversation. And so those are things to consider if you're going to move from a restorative circle to this conference style. That you use for those most serious offenses. You noticed in this one that the incident had happened the day before. And the important thing to know is that you need to do some pre-work for these, that the facilitator needs to meet with those who are deeply involved in advance to make sure that they understand how this conversation is going to go, what kind of questions you're going to ask, anticipate any needs that those students are going to have. That's going to be an important part of the process. And it's going to be important to consider that and plan that so that that restorative conference can be effective, so that you can have a conversation like those wonderful students in that example video have as part of the conversation. And so in my last 30 seconds, I would just ask you to think about in your day-to-day, what you learned, what's significant about it, and then what is something that you want to do, that you want to change in your program. Remember, take small steps as you begin to implement restorative practices in your program. Begin with those affective statements. And then from there, continue to make sure that you're creating a space where students can grow and learn by having those small impromptu conversations, 80% positive, 20% in the negative or addressing behaviors that you've seen, before you're ready to move to those bigger conversations with a larger group of students. And use those, but use those cautiously. And when your students become accustomed to the affective statements, when they become accustomed to you having those small impromptu conversations. And so we are pretty much done. I'm running out of my time for today, but please reach out if you have any questions. I can hang out a minute, but I'm going to pass it back over to Paula just for her to wrap up, because it is 2:00.
Thank you so much, Hillary. And thank you everyone for joining today. I've posted a feedback survey in the chat. I just got a notification that today's isn't on there, but if you just get the link and refresh it in about a minute, it should be there. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I want to thank Hillary for this wonderful presentation. And I hope that we'll see you all next week. Next week, we have our first Perspectives from the Field talk show of this webinar season. Perspectives from the Field is an interactive talk show where the audience guides the conversation. It's really fun, and I hope to see you all there next